everybody. Welcome. This is our first meeting of the New York Society for General Semantics in 2019. Woo! Yeah. And if you don't act properly, this may be our last. Well, we're very pleased to start up a brand new year. And I'd like to welcome you all. Our topic for tonight is the state of the semantic environment. As you might imagine, it had occurred to me some time ago that this is around the time when we get the State of the Union address here in the U.S., so that would be a good way to think about an opening session for this year. I certainly didn't imagine the extent to which this might become even more a news item, more than a ritual item, the State of the Union address, but we're here to talk about the semantic environment. Of course, you all know that Alfred Korzybski, the founder of General Semantics, introduced the term. He actually referred to the neuro-semantic environment and also the neuro-linguistic environment. And anyone who is familiar with or has heard of neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, you know where they got the idea from. And actually, I did a little Google search on semantic environment just to see what the hell. And so now there's some folks down in Australia who are talking about the neuro-semantic environment as sort of like, well, this is different from NLP. We're doing something else. So, but we represent the original and the best here. And this was, yes, thank you. And Korzybski brought this up, and it was in conjunction with his emphasis on looking at the organism as a whole in an environment. I don't know if you could hear it when I said it, but there are hyphens between all of those words, organism as a whole in an environment. It's inseparable. And really, this is the beginning, in many ways, of looking at communication as an environment. And leading into, following Korzybski's lead, we had Wendell Johnson, who was a major figure, major scholar in speech pathology and in communication, and kind of the inspiration for communicology, which our friend Corey Anton is involved in. Wendell Johnson introduced the concept of the semantic environment in his classic work on general semantics, People in Quandaries. And I don't think it's too inappropriate of a plug for me to say that it has recently been reissued in a new printing, is available on the Institute of General Semantics website. And I'll add that it was required reading in the old media ecology program, in the seminars run by Neil Postman and Christine Nystrom. They considered it to be the best of the classic works in general semantics. And really going back to, I guess about 12 years now, and had the 50th, or this is the 60th anniversary of the printing of People in Quandaries. We had a really lovely event, a big event, celebrating that the longtime president of the New York Society, Alan Flagg, had helped to organize. So it is certainly very significant for us here in the New York Society. Also quite significant, Neil Postman himself picked up on this idea of the semantic environment, and apart from being one of the inspirations for the concept of the media environment and media ecology, and he devoted a chapter of his 1970 work, his book, Crazy Talk, Stupid Talk, to the study of the semantic environment. environment. And according to Tom Gencarelli, Tom points to Crazy Talk, Stupid Talk as the key book where Postman came into his own as a public intellectual. I'll note that coupled with the following year, that was 1976, the following year he became editor of Etc., the General Semantics Journal, for a decade. I say this because I think it's worth noting that Tom Gencarelli is now the editor of Etc. And I always bring this up, but you can get a subscription to Etc., which really is a great journal, simply by being a member of the Institute of General Semantics, which is really, it's $50 a regular membership and $25 for students, was it? Yeah. And of course, we don't charge to anything here at the New York Society. We just encourage everyone to be members of the Institute.
We take your soul.
Yes, we do that. But going back to Postman and Crazy Talk, Stupid Talk, he explained that, I'm going to quote, "A semantic environment includes, first of all, people. Second, their purposes. Third, the general rules of discourse by which such purposes are usually achieved. And fourth, the particular talk actually being used in the situation." And Postman went on to note that there are many different kinds of semantic environments. Of course, this here right now is a semantic environment of one kind. And he described them as situations and social structures, and I quote again, in which people want to do something to, for, with, or against other people, as well as to, for, with, or against themselves. This wasn't the first time that Postman brought up the idea of semantic environment. It actually comes up in an essay that was included in a co-edited work, Language in America, that was published, I think it was 1969 that was published, huh?
I think so.
Yeah. Co-edited by Charlie Weingartner and Terry Moran. And he had an essay in there called, I love this title, Demeaning of Meaning. Right? Like the demeaning of, you got, okay. So he wrote there, I quote, "Those semantic environments which give form to our most important human transactions," that's what he was concerned with, and that he maintained that in considering the ecology of the semantic environment, we must take into account what is called the communications revolution. And of course, in this he was bringing to bear the kind of perspective that he got from his learning from Marshall McLuhan, among others. And he went on to observe that, I quote, "The invention of new and various media of communication have given a voice and an audience to many people whose opinions would otherwise not have been solicited, and who in fact have little, if anything, to contribute to public issues." Does this kind of ring true? I don't know. Well, 1 year ago, we had the rare opportunity of presenting a program consisting of out-of-towners who've converged on New York City to attend the annual Media Ecology Association board meeting. So we're continuing this practice this year. We're being opportunist, and all of these panel members are from somewhere else. And we're all used to, us New York Society people are used to things being New York, all things New York, but today we're going to hear from people from out of town. Between you and me, I think usually people from out of town have nothing very interesting to say. But hopefully they'll be proven wrong tonight.
I doubt it.
I'd like to introduce our participants. On my immediate left, Carolyn Aronis, is special faculty in communication studies at Colorado State University, and a discourse, culture, and identity lecturer at the University of Colorado in Boulder. And studies and teaches about communicative practices that challenge the essence of media and that contribute to our understanding of communication, intersectionality, and intimacy. To her left, the older gentleman, no stranger to us general semantics folks, is Ed Tumaniak. He is a professor of communication and director of the Keck Media Lab and program director for digital studies, for the digital studies major at St. Mary's College of California. And more importantly, he's a trustee of the Institute of General Semantics. He's also the immediate past president of the Media Ecology Association and also edited, etc., for several years.
And put on a great conference.
To Ed's left, the younger gentleman, Matt Thomas, was educated at the University of Southern California and the University of Iowa, where he got his PhD in American Studies and currently teaches and writes in Iowa City. Matt Thomas. And finally, to his left, Julia Hildebrand, a PhD candidate, almost done.
Yes, almost.
In communication, culture, and media at Drexel University. That's in Philadelphia, which is sort of a suburb of New York. Her research lies at the intersections of critical media studies and mobility research, with a special interest in visual communication and mobile technologies. So we're very pleased to welcome our panel. And since Ed is the experienced member of our group, maybe we'll start with you, Ed. Kick us off.
Very good. Thank
What
you,
is the
Ed.
state of the semantic environment?
That is a great question, and I'm glad you asked. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
In the announcement for tonight's presentation, Lance did a wonderful job of framing our conversation tonight. The semantic environment, as Lance already pointed out, was nicely defined by Neil Postman in Crazy Talk, Stupid Talk, when he talks about the people, their purposes, their rules, and the situations they find themselves in which semantics becomes the critical aspect of their discourse. Neil points out that there's many types of semantic environments, including broad categories such as situations and social structures. And we can find ourselves needing to ask the questions we're asking tonight, whether we're in a one-on-one social situation or if we're immersed in an environment, a social structure that has semantics at its heart, which all do. Neil points out something that is quite fundamental in its simplicity and quite profound in its simplicity. People want something to do to other people, something for other people, something with other people, and something against other people. And likewise, people want something to themselves, for themselves, with themselves, and even sometimes against themselves. We oftentimes have these tensions, these pushes and pulls, as we find ourselves reflecting on our immersion into our semantic environments. The problem of the semantic environment in the contemporary state, the state that we're in right now, was of a concern to Neil Postman in 1976 when he wrote Crazy Talk, Stupid Talk, and certainly is of a high concern personally for myself as well. Neil writes that the state of the semantic environments that give form to our most important human transactions are the critical measures of our daily life. And if you think about the state of our current semantic environment, one only has to do a quick scan of our news feeds to look at stories about the government shutdown, I believe now in day number 27. And the semantic symbol for that, a border wall, that has become the symbol for that. Our good friends from Mexico here, please pay for it to keep us out of your country. And we are all at loggerheads as to how to deal with this semantic conundrum. Whether you're a Democrat, Republican, liberal, progressive, conservative, nationalist, etc. These are all competing voices for our understanding of this concept, border wall. Think of the other types of fallouts that we currently are undergoing. And again, this is just in the last 48 hours. The cancellation of our State of the Union address, or at least the call for it, by the Democrats. The response by the president canceling the congressional trip overseas, as if to say, you know, you do this to me, I'm going to do it back to you. Brexit is in the process of imploding in front of our eyes. We have the Russiagate probe. We have illegal immigration with illegal aliens becoming the bad guys, the undesirables that we don't want into our country. And George Lakoff, I know, would have a wonderful time evaluating and assessing the rhetoric contained in our immigration language. The problem that we're facing today, Neil describes as a demeaning of meaning, especially in environments that contain special meaning for us, like our political discourse, our educational discourse, etc. These environments are especially important, and again, Neil points us to the fact that we are demeaning the meaning of those relationships. He blames this on communications, plural, revolution, meaning the technological revolution. As he says, it's given a voice and an audience to many people whose opinions would otherwise not have been solicited and who in fact have little to contribute to public issues. It's here where I would digress a bit or move away from Neil's statement here. I disagree with Neil in the sense that in the modern era, there is no one who in fact has little to contribute to public issues. Everyone is contributing. These are real people contributing real responses. For the vast majority of the silent majority, they voted in the last two elections with their votes. Okay? They definitely had something to say in terms of who they voted for. And certainly we can look at the rise of the vacuous opinions that we see on all of the news outlets that are creating a problem with differentiating the real from the surreal. Fake news has become the news. And as such, even the most quote-unquote useless of voices have an extreme use in the modern era. It has created the worst that Neil predicted in technopoly. The answer to this, and I'll get to it at the end of my comments here, is empathy, which is something akin to compassion. And it's the ability of seeing the world through the eyes of the other. Martin Buber, of course, talked extensively about that. in his notion of the I versus thou, the me and the you. And Postman addresses this directly in the concluding parts of Chapter 1 of Crazy Talk. Let's see if I can call this up quickly here. Hang on 1 second, I just had it, it went away here. Give me 1 second. There we go. So,
I'm gonna start texting you.
yeah, exactly. There we go. Okay. So this is Neil's words. The argument goes something like this. One of the fundamental principles of life is differentiation. It is differentiation, the contrast between one thing and another, that produces the energy for growth and change. Where there is no differentiation of purpose, structure, role, or function, you have in natural and social systems entropy, decay, uselessness, and death. In the contemporary environment, there is no differentiation. All messages are watered down to be literally the same. It doesn't matter if they're coming from Fox News or MSNBC. The 24-hour news cycle has rendered a surreal world in which, again, the surreal is almost undetectable from the real. It's here that Neil begins to give us some sense of what's crazy and what's stupid about this. What he says is that stupidity is words, something we speak. What we say tells us a lot about how we manage our minds. And if we think stupid, we talk stupid. And we are indeed thinking stupid these days. And collectively, we are talking stupid. But what's the difference between that and crazy? Well, crazy is very similar. It's often defined as repeated behavior expecting new outcomes. And that's exactly what we're doing. Day after day, we look at our news feeds, expecting something different. Yet the same old stories resurface themselves day after day with nothing changing. Look at some of the things, some of the memes that have been circulating around now for several years. Lock her up. Make America great again. Mexico will pay for the wall. Immigrants are bad. Muslims are evil, etc. Right? Those messages continue to shape and form our public discourse. Now, Postman is quick to point out that there's a danger in calling this speech crazy or stupid, because these are just taxonomies of ridicule. We're just making fun of people, creating more fake context within which we try to understand the world. It's one of the problems of the modern age Neil points us to in the beginning of Chapter 1 of Crazy Talks, Stupid Talk. He talks of the pure illusion, the fabrication, the lack of substance over style. And Postman quotes I.A. Richards when he says, "We need standards for purpose, meaning, and reason. We need rules for semantic order, especially in this day and age when rules seem to be breaking down at an ever-increasing rate." Again, it's here that Postman grounds some solutions squarely within this semantical environment. Postman says that language cannot be taken out of its environment, as Lance pointed out, that the semantic environment is the environment that we are immersed in, and they are inseparable. The linear model of communication, Neil tells us, what he oftentimes refers to as the ping-pong model. I lob an idea to you and you lob it back to me, and we keep going back and forth. This ping-pong model is not an accurate model anymore of our semantic environment. Instead, he gives us examples too, like in a Catholic confessional, when you say, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned," it sounds perfectly fine in that environment, in the confession box. But you walk into a batter's box at a baseball game and turn to the ump and say, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned," he'd probably throw you out of the game, right? The kind of box you step into environmentally determines how your words get interpreted semantically. So a large question here, a question looms larger. That is this nature or nurture? Are we made this way in the semantical environment, or is this something learned? I'm working recently with Terry Deacon, a name familiar with many of us here. He was our AKML speaker about 4 or 5 years ago here in New York. He's an evolutionary biologist at the University of California, and he also has an appointment at Stanford Medical School as a neurobiologist. And he's been doing research currently in this question of semantic environments and whether or not these come from the natural environment or from some other environment unique to itself. He begins by, in a paper that's soon to be published, talking about how Darwin and someone else named Peter Kropotkin in 1902 started to speculate that there really is a gene that fosters altruism and empathy, that we really can learn to listen to others and cut through the fog of the semantical differences that separate us. The problem was proving that. And for quite a few years, that proof went on, leading to 1976 and Richard Dawkins and his theory of means, and how, as we pass on genes from generation to generation, we also pass on cultural artifacts mimetically from generation to generation. This led to work by the Danish evolutionary biologist Heiligen in 1992, where he talks about unselfish altruism actually being both a mimetic inheritance as well as a biological inheritance, suggesting that the two must live side by side, and you can't take one out of the other. So this leads us to my concluding comments here, which is that if we are to find an answer in the question of today's semantical environment, it's going to lie in our capacity to actually think about our messages and our interaction with them in an empathetic way. Not an easy task. When one looks at the overwhelming dysfunctionality in today's environment, and one asks a truly deeply reflective question of what state are we in right now, it's clear that we are in a state of confusion. And while many people, like I mentioned, Terry Deacon, seem very optimistic that we will grow ourselves out of this in an evolutionary way, and that it's a rapidly moving target that is leading us to an eventual breakthrough very soon, I'm very pessimistic about that. And while the empathy argument is a very fascinating one, there's no proof, at least as I see it, that any of this is going to come to fruition. You just have to wait and see. Thank you.
Well, thanks for bumming us out, Ed.
Least I can do.
You're very positive.
Speaking of semantic environment, I asked Ed to stand, but none of the others, so it's not necessary. But Carolyn, are you okay with following up on that? Or,
Yeah, I don't have such a full up on that.
But,
I have other things
yeah,
to say.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I read Neil Postman's text, and I thought I have some background with discourse analysis, discourse approaches, with texts, and with my experience being an immigrant in the U.S. And having and teaching also about discourse and identity, I thought to bring up the discourse of immigrants, discourse of minorities, discourse of people that do not align necessarily with what maybe Postman would call the normative discourse. I have to tell you, when I read this, I felt uncomfortable with the word stupidity and uncomfortable with the word crazy. First, I don't like labels so much. And I learned that what in Israel, my original country, I would call maybe stupidity with other people. Now, as an immigrant here, I feel uncomfortable with this. People that do not know how to speak the language and how to follow the order of the environment, many times could be counted as with having a stupid talk. I wrote few comments, not as serious as you did, Ed. And crazy talk counts as what is inappropriate, what is confused, what is not well suited. And I'm asking if there is in our age a talk that is confused, that is not well suited. And if we're not in that age that we're starting to accept other talks, other ways to voice ourselves, other way to bring out new style of talk, new opinions to the public sphere. I thought a lot about Me Too, the movement, and understanding that the process of Me Too is actually as a crazy talk that led us for a change. Because how change happens is when people actually do not obey the semantic environment, when we don't follow the rules of structured environments, and when we don't conform. So I just wanted to raise that idea of having, and hopefully having, that time in the U.S. I'm not sure if how much in other countries, by the way, and I do appreciate it here, where it's okay to bring out different voices, when it's okay not to obey to structures of the way people talk. And do we actually have a way to make a change without crazy talk and without stupid talk? And I said I don't like and I feel uncomfortable with those words because I feel that Postman is very judgmental. And he writes also about it as being very judgmental. And I just feel all the time when I read things like this, well, he would say that I'm having a stupid talk. Well, he would have said that I have a crazy talk. And that feeling and this like uncomfortable situation where we're not sure about how the other judges makes, I think, people feel uncomfortable with what in what opinion and what voices they can bring to the table. So it's just me and my feeling regarding this text, which he does bring up very interesting ideas regarding how communication can be successful. And I can also refer to John Austin and Searle and Grice that brought up ideas of what is a successful communication, what is a successful interaction. If we talk too much, is it successful? Probably not. If we talk too little, if we are not, if we're not obeying the rules of being true to what we say. So there are other rules, and many of them align with what Postman is saying about communication and successful communication. But I would love to move to the idea of being successful in communication, other than being not stupid or stupid. And it's interesting to see how much in that time it was important to be smart. Not to be counted as having a stupid talk, but to have to be to bring smart things to the table. And I think that in our era and in our semantic environment, we're not talking so much about being smart, but as being successful. In being saying the right things or saying not the right things. In the title of what you wrote there about this session, you said that it's open to the world. So I wasn't sure if to bring up a new example about the world, but yeah. I will not bring something about the world, but I wanted to bring up Desserteau with talking about tactics and strategies. Desserteau explained that there are norms within society that are strategies and are of the hegemonic practice of how the world should work. And there are tactics of people that will not align with the structure, with the normative structure. And in that way, these people will try or will be able to undermine, will be able to fight a little bit the normative structure and will feel a little bit empowered. So I just thought to bring this to this discussion. If crazy talk, I'm not sure it's stupid talk, by the way, but if crazy talk is actually a way of tactics, a way to a little bit not obey the structure and a little bit have some empowerment and some different way of change things. Yeah, I think he writes, Postman writes about conflicted purposes, and it feels to me that these days there is not a lot of conflict, but just people talk to themselves. People just talk not necessarily to one another. And if we are thinking about successful of communication, the idea of successful is to learn how to talk to one another. He writes a little bit about how we should think of what the other understands from what we say. And I think this is the main goal, and we're kind of losing this. People really like to hear what they want to say, and we're kind of missing hearing the other. So I'm not sure if I can define what is the state of the semantic environment, but for sure I can tell that there are many voices coming up to this environment. Some of them do talk to one another and some do not. But it's okay to learn how to understand one another and how to understand and even accept crazy talk as a way for a change. Thank you.
Thank you, and I don't think Postman would consider what you said crazy or stupid at all.
Okay, thank you.
Well, Matt,
Sure.
How about hearing from you?
Sure. I want to go back to something that Ed read. I'm not going to read the whole thing again, but it was the passage from the Neil Postman reading we're all ripping on here on differentiation. So I'll just read sort of like a part of it again, and I apologize, Julie, if you're going to also read this. One of the fundamental principles of life is differentiation. He says it is differentiation, the contrast between one thing and another, that produces the energy for growth and change. Where there is no differentiation of purpose, structure, role, function, you have in natural and social systems, he says, entropy, decay, uselessness, and death. Getting really serious there. Differentiation among social systems is codified and preserved, indeed made visible through language for him. And so when language becomes undifferentiated, human situations, he says, disintegrate. Science becomes indistinguishable from religion, which becomes indistinguishable from commerce, which becomes indistinguishable from law, and so on. If each of them serves the same function, then none of them serves any function. When such a process is occurring, an appropriate word for it, he says, is pollution. And here I am using, he says here in 1976, the word in almost the same sense as it is used in natural ecology, so sort of foretelling perhaps media ecology. So I just was really interested in wanting to kind of zoom in or zero in, whatever metaphor you like, on that passage, because I'm really kind of interested in what Postman sort of wants in this piece, like what is his kind of idealized semantic environment, practices, kind of overall. And it seems like he's really, really concerned with semantic environments kind of fading into each other or blurring or conflating. And then he says elsewhere in this piece, he says, if communication is to happen, we require not merely messages, but an ordered situation in which messages can assume meaning. And so he's like really, it feels like to me, kind of preoccupied with or interested in semantic situations having kind of discrete barriers and maybe overlapping like a little bit, but not too much so that they become kind of slippery. And so he talks about like classic kind of broad, large semantic environments. He says science, politics, commerce, war, sports, religion, sex, and law. And then, of course, have sub kind of semantic environments in them. And he really seems to me interested in kind of preserving these rules as being discrete and distinct. But at the same time, he's sort of interested in people having an ability to what now more kind of currently we call code switching, though he doesn't use that term, to be able to move from one semantic environment to another and sort of be able to kind of like have these conversations with a priest, to go to Ed's example, and then be able to go talk sports at a bar, and then be able to go talk to your family, and then to do these kind of different things. But it seems to me that this kind of breakdown of order has happened to, I don't know, like 100 degree by 2018, from 1976 to 2018, and that there is no really clear, differentiated, distinct, unitary semantic environment that any of us are in at any time. So like right now, I mean, like we're in this room, but like I guess I could go on my phone and be in a conversation about sports online in 2 seconds, right? So that like we're always sort of like existing in like multiple semantic environments, and we always probably did, but in a way that's like even more kind of like extended. And so this idea of like pollution, he like uses this term, is like he doesn't kind of think of, he says at the end of this essay that we all sort of read as homework for this, he's not interested in like a pure semantic environment, but he is sort of interested in, there's like a sort of a tipping point, to use the kind of Malcolm Gladwell term, where too much pollution is then kind of like chaos. And it seems to me that like we're living in a time of completely polluted semantic environments. Like even now, like this sort of lovely car horn honking outside, it's just, and like anybody could go on their phone, and like we could be in 15 semantic environments right now if we wanted to. And this is a rather kind of ordered, kind of sedate, scholarly kind of environment, but even it can be polluted really, really quickly. So I think, like, I'm sort of interested in kind of what Postman is, how he's sort of imagining that, and I don't sort of like kind of totally understand it. But now I think he would be even more sort of chagrined and bemused and disappointed. So I'll leave it at that.
I think he's right. Okay, Julia?
Yes, thank you so much. This order of speeches couldn't have worked out better for me. Because Matt, that was exactly the passage I was going to assume, and I don't know how you telepathically knew this.
I'm sorry.
But first of all, Lance, thank you so much for having us. It's quite a privilege to be in this wonderful, elegant place with good company, talking about great ideas. And yeah, what I was really interested in when rereading and revisiting Postman's text again was this passage about pollution, which I find quite an inflammatory term. And if I was to post something on Twitter about the pollution of the semantic environments, who knows the kind of storm I might be facing from diverse communities. But I started to think in two different directions. Well, not really different. There is clearly overlap. But I immediately thought about how, and this is where I guess I'd like to move away from pollution, but this meddling, and you talked about these little boundaries that we think they're there, but now they seem to collapse. We have this context collapse with, for example, public political communication that's now entering social media, and the rules are being redefined. You know, now CNN keeps talking about this tweet and that tweet as opposed to whatever announcement was made through the official channels. And so, and at the same time, you know, just as social media is messing with political discourse, politics are messing with public discourse more generally. And what I mean here is, I don't know if you've ever been in this situation where you wanted to post something, you know, an opinion, for instance, and you were hesitant because you thought about the 1,000 different ways your comment could be misunderstood and could potentially start a massive storm against you, right? So I'm sure we've all maybe been in those hesitant situations. You never know which tweet is going to blow up, right, and ruin everything. So, you know, both these different levels. So that's the whole public political communication that I've been wondering about. The other part is the public science communication, where I've been wondering the kind of semantic environment, and I do believe maybe it should be the states of the multi-semantic environments that we're talking about today, since there's so many. But I wonder whether public science, public scientists, academics are doing their purpose, are fulfilling their purpose, are doing it with the discourse necessary and with the content, or probably with the content, but whether we are fulfilling our duty towards improving society. Because what's happening, we see the semantic environments of science meddle with religion, but also meddle with politics and meddle with whatever semantic environment Twitter is operating in, or social media in general. All of that gets enmeshed. And so I've been thinking maybe we need to reconsider the kind of talk we're using, and this is where I really appreciate Carlin's provocation about maybe crazy talk and stupid talk is what we should be thinking about. Not necessarily to, you know, bring the academic discourse down, but maybe to lift everybody up to where it is. Not through bad academic writing and justifying bad academic writing, but to justifying more the why and so what of science and of academia and academic communication. So, yes, those were the two examples of currently dysfunctional communication that I was observing, and a lot has to do with studying media and doing more media education. It's about figuring out what is this digital semantic environment and the sub-environments that are building up in here, and how can we make sure that this boundary shift that we're experiencing with religion and politics and science is not becoming something that's more harmful. ultimately. And also thinking about, well, how can science translate into this digital communication sphere without working on inflammatory statements, right? Right now, science gets seen when it's inflammatory, and obviously that's not helpful. So, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. These are just some things I've been thinking about lately. Thank you.
What a great set of opening remarks. I think it's worth noting that science has a very special role in general semantics as kind of the basis of Korzybski's approach, the idea that the kind of semantic environment that is at least ideally followed by scientists is one that should be enforced in a broader sense for all of us. You know, by that I mean that withholding judgment, not making inferences and sticking to facts and observations, and understanding that the fallible position that we're in, and that we're always open to refutation. We always have to keep testing our reality. So science, and what Korzybski did is he found science to be a particularly effective semantic environment for human conduct and for progress, and so tried to apply that to other scientific environments, which would not be pollution in that case. There's kind of an interesting tension there that's brought up between there. Of course, Postman was less sympathetic to that view than Korzybski was. So, and the blurring of the boundaries today, again, is very much something that folks like McLuhan, Postman, Joshua Meyerowitz, many others have pointed to as part and parcel of television and electronic media. So I think we have a very interesting theme here, you know, in terms of semantic pollution, and if we say that the way a semantic environment has to work is to have a sense of order and boundary and differentiation. So I wonder if we could perhaps go round again and how then should we look at the state of the semantic environment today? I mean, are we breaking down or are we opening up? Is an interesting question. So this time I'd like to ask Carolyn, to start us off, since you were our great provocateur for this question.
So, can you ask the question again? Are we breaking?
Well, are we? I mean, you bring up, for example, Me Too.
Mm-hmm.
And you say maybe that's crazy talk,
Mm-hmm.
but is someone who dismisses Me Too?
Mm-hmm.
Who's the fellow who did that YouTube video from?
About
With he played a president.
Kevin Spacey.
Kevin Spacey, right?
Okay.
Is Kevin Spacey's YouTube video where he's playing the role that he was fired from, sort of playing it without being identified as playing that character, and in a way referencing in an indirect way, but an obvious way, his own troubles being accused of sexual harassment. Is that crazy talk?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think, like, if we look at media, if we look at news are actually being made because of crazy talk. Crazy talk is what the media find as news. And that's and yeah, of course you can think of Kevin Spacey, and you can think of others when they break that normative way of talking, normative way of how things of the order. These are actually crazy talk, but crazy talk that makes the news, and crazy talk that will make a change. So I think like that the idea of order in these days is starting to be broken. But what I wanted maybe actually to say a little bit more is that it feels to me that the idea of rules are many times rules of privileged people, rules of men, rules of people that learned from young how to speak, rules of people that know what is politeness within their society. And so many times women's talk looks like crazy talk. Artists talk looks like crazy talk. Immigrants talk. People that are unprivileged and never learned how to speak in a certain situation. That this kind of setting where is very, very different and not familiar for them. These will be counted as crazy talk or stupid talk, and in a way will be missed or dismissed. So I have a feeling that we are into an era where things like this, and when we talk about privileges all the time, at least in academia, and we do try to realize that there are other voices, and there is kind of a tendency to lead into breaking the structure of environment. So that's what is my feeling, or at least my wish.
In the latter part of chapter 1 of Crazy Talk, Stupid Talk, Neil has a prescient example that he gives, referring to the Watergate scandal of several decades ago. And he says this: oftentimes in public matters, the question of what sort of semantic environment one is confronted with must be settled, as in the instance of Watergate. One might say that the whole issue of Watergate centered around the question: how shall we talk to each other about the events that took place? Think of, again, every morning you wake up to your daily news feed and you scratch your head and ask the question, how am I going to deal with this piece of news today? In a world that seems like you can't get any more crazy or stupid in our discourse, another day comes along where it's just that, more crazy and more stupid. So how do we confront these new environments? That's the question. And while I know I ended on a very dour, negative note, there actually dismal note, there actually is a silver lining, and that is we again must continue to look for that little kernel of truth in the voice of each and every person, even with those that are 180 degrees diametrically opposed to us, and especially those who are diametrically opposed to us. Again, there are no more silent voices. People are asking to be heard, and in this electronic environment, their voices are being heard, for better or for worse. We can't ignore that. So it's up to us, it's incumbent upon us to assume responsibilities for looking for those kernels of truth in the world of fake.
As long as this point to suspend judgment.
Yes.
That's Korzybski's point.
Exactly. Yep. Well put.
There was a worry a few years ago, I want to say 2015, that people were trapped in their filter bubbles. That is to say, they were living in their own kind of semantic environments, and that those environments were continually being reinforced upon them. So, in other words, like if you were called yourself or thought of yourself as a Republican on Facebook, all your sort of news and things that you would see would be Republican news, and then vice versa. There was a lot of worry about this. Is this preventing us from talking to each other, and so on and so forth. Eli Tarser wrote a book called The Filter Bubble about it. And then, like, in the last year or so, or even the last, like, 6 months, there was, like, some research about this that I've been looking at, and they're sort of like, well, maybe this whole kind of idea of filter bubbles was, like, sort of overblown. That people were not, like, in these kind of, you know, like walled off semantic worlds of Republican and Democrat, etc. But that there was like more overlap, but that people just weren't able to kind of talk to each other through these, so that they would see the same articles, they would just reach kind of like different conclusions about this. And so this is where I think like Postman is like really helpful, this kind of idea of like semantic environment versus this notion of filter bubble. And that like Postman, like, again, like I'm really sort of interested in like what is it that he finds problematic, or what does he seem to want, or like what is his sort of ideal kind of world. In other books, you know, he comes out and sort of says it more clearly. I don't know, building a bridge to the 18th century, or like what is sort of like Postman after is always kind of my question when reading him. But like he says at some point, he says two kind of semantic environments can't coexist healthily at the same time without something kind of like happening like negative. And this is like his idea of pollution. But I'm wondering, like after listening to kind of Carolyn's comments, if maybe it isn't like more of a kind of Hegelian synthesis kind of thing, where like one environment's here, another's here, and they come together and it's kind of pollution and chaos and messy, but then they form like some other environment and we all sort of like figure it out and are able to talk to each other. And so maybe kind of like that's what's happening with something like Me Too or whatever. We're in the chaos of a new semantic environment forming, and we just have to live through it, and perhaps it's uncomfortable, but perhaps like we'll all adjust to the new environment like we are able to do as human beings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think maybe the idea of like overlapping environments creates kind of awkward situation, and this awkwardness feels awkward and feels uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But many things, interesting things are coming out of this, and even if we are built not right in the situation, we do need to recognize that important things are rising.
So, I mean, just, you would say then that when Donald Trump approaches a ceremonial presidential situation and treats it like a campaign rally, I mean, this would be an example of what you're talking about, that it's a good thing, as certainly some of his followers would say, because it disrupts business as usual, it disrupts the status quo, and you think that a new kind of semantic environment will emerge out of this?
So Postman, right, like in his other...
This is what you're saying?
So
This is what you stand for?
In his other work, he idealizes, right, like the Lincoln Douglas debates as like these like moments of, you know, like as a kind of semantic environment that he looks upon, somewhat wistfully, I would think it's fair to say. But maybe that there's something kind of interesting in Trump buying football team hamburgers. That it's maybe kind of saying that the office of the presidency should not have these rules and kind of like respect attributed to it. Maybe it needs to be, maybe the norms and the rules of that sort of office should be thought of differently, and not with such, oh, the president is up here and the people are down here and we have to have the pomp and circumstance. So, I mean, that's a kind of semantic environment reading of something like that, you know, maybe.
Accept or reject.
Yeah. Or to think about to what extent are maybe some of these things kind of interesting. Maybe the president shouldn't be, oh, Mr. President. So maybe we should treat him as in a different way.
Should be Miss President.
Yeah. Oh.
No. Julia, you're...
So you asked, is it breaking down or opening up? And I would say yes. It's breaking down, and as a result, it's opening up. And I think you were speaking to that in some way, right? There's like these different semantic environments clashing, reconfiguring, and new things coming out of it. And we can judge, talk what's good, what's bad. There's good examples and bad examples, of course. And my question is more, what role do we have in this process? Is this something where we intervene, where we, need to take action towards it or against it? What is our ethical, civic, scientific, just human role in this clashing of different semantic environments? And what I was trying to get at before in terms of public science communication, the so my concern is, a lot of this knowledge is behind university doors, it's behind paid journal walls, and then it's, even the writing may be very inaccessible. What are some ways that we can open it up as it might be breaking down without sounding too
Have any ideas?
Things going on.
I mean, there's more and more people who are looking to social media to communicate science, right? And and some do successfully, right? And we've had it in television. This is not a new model, but there's something about social media that clearly favors inflammatory, viral, something that will, oh, look at this young kid telling those anti-vaccine people how wrong they are, and once he's talking about something else that's less controversial, nobody really cares anymore for what this, young scholar has to say, for example. So, yeah, there's still room for improvement, more experimentation.
Yeah, I think it's and what Glenn said, and with this example, and this too, it raises up the idea or the feeling of like misfit environment for certain things. And what do you think about politics that uses social media in order to bring up its messages and to practice politics? So it is actually a really not right environment or an overlapping environment, or actually stupid talk that just does not align and does not provide what is supposed to do.
Yeah. And this is where media studies and, media ecology and general semantics can help,
Yeah.
unpack and offer some avenues to pursue. Yeah.
I think, part of the question is with this opening, if you like, is it, is this pollution, the blurring, does it reach, at some point, if we, bringing in differentiation, which is a systems concept, we need some openness to take in, in order to evolve. Too much of that and the system breaks down. So that really, is the fundamental question. Are we approaching a breakdown overall, or are we simply evolving into a new state? I wanted to just, to point out, so we're looking at different institutions here. I mean, a lot of what we're talking about in politics, we also bring up the university and these kinds of semantic environments. Read a passage from Wendell Johnson's People in Quandaries, where he talks about some of these, and Julia Riley points out, semantic environments. And he says that, talks about evidence of our recognition of the importance of semantic environment is to be seen in our system of public schools, trade schools, colleges and universities, hospitals, clinics, housing projects, art galleries, concert halls, theaters, libraries, publications, radio broadcasting facilities, 1946, etc. They may not always be used, quote unquote, in the public interest, but the very fact that we jealously maintain them testifies to the importance we place on controlling somehow the semantic influences that affect our lives. And so I think it raises an interesting question on to what extent in government, as an example, does pollution from other factors, and talking about jealously maintaining separation in the U.S., I mean, it has been between church and state. That's always been a troublesome dynamic for us. But also when you think about a hospital, do we want to break down the boundaries, in the hospital, between medical science and other kinds of semantic environments? Postman would point to the university and the fact that we, for example, exclude astrology, palm reading, reading the book with phrenology, and I mean, all of these kind of pseudosciences is part of maintaining the boundaries of the semantic environment. So, again, is there a point where that becomes a breakdown, and to what extent then do we want to protect these things in a situation where we're acknowledging that pollution, if you like, or blurring of boundaries or opening has been increasing. So I'm going to challenge Carolyn on this.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm skipping, and
Okay,
I'll
you
think about
pass,
it. I'll
okay.
pass. Yeah.
I think in the arena of politics, look for example at, again, we're in day 27 of the government shutdown because of a political concept of the border wall. So real lives are being affected by this confluence of political discourse and actual functioning governance, and the discourse of a functioning body politic. In academia, you see this more and more with sort of the purity of the academic enterprise in the acquisition and discovery of new knowledge and the teaching of that knowledge to younger generations. And that comes smack up against administrative efficiencies that say what we need to do is operate under these semantical frameworks in order to be cost effective and to make sure that we maintain our enrollments, where even though many of those things are antithetical to a true learning environment. So I think it's another example of these worlds coming together, these semantical worlds coming together, and immediately finding it hard to find synergy in there. We struggle to find it, but at the end of the day, it seems like both environments get polluted. The college administrative environment is polluted, the academic enterprise is polluted. In government, the pollution is everywhere. I guess that's why we're trying to drain the swamp. But we have a long way to go before it's drained.
Well, I'm wondering, what if we're wrong about palm reading? Just as one example, I have no opinion on palm reading, but what if, because I just recently heard about a serious conference happening with several hundred participants, talking about the fact that the Earth is flat. So, and obviously this is not, this is something we know, we have agreed on, that, we've moved past that. But all the other things that we've agreed on, what if, in so many years, centuries, we find out we may have been wrong about this? So I agree that this boundary keeping is important to, not have an environment be overwhelmed with pollution so that we can't understand each other, we can't advance knowledge. But I'm always unsure about dismissing. I feel like we know so little about us and our world. Excuse me?
Are you a time binder?
And this was just one example that came up. This has nothing to do with palm reading in particular. But yeah, I'm just wondering about this kind of idea, and this goes back to this idea that maybe some crazy talk actually is helpful.
Wasn't that Flat Earth Society? They said
Yes, that's what I was
the conference was attended by people all around the world.
Lance's old friend Camille Paglia says astrology is a sort of like ancient kind of symbol system of meaning that she finds and sort of forwards kind of respect, kind of contra to Postman. She's a kind of interlocutor with Postman at various times. Nassam Talib at NYU talks about sort of herbal placebo effect kind of thing, and then they get better. And so he sees it actually as being like kind of okay. Maybe something like you go to a psychic and you feel better. Perhaps you're not taking advantage of a mental institution or something. So maybe there are some things. There is benefits to these things. But maybe.
Yeah, and maybe I can add that I liked reading the idea. He takes Karl Popper and Cole to ask or explain that we actually, what we do, and especially in science, we're asking ourselves all the time and criticizing what we know if it's not an error. We're not actually finding what is true, but we're trying to be critical and to see if something is not an error. So this is like the practice of academia. So yeah, so I don't know if to say what is not right or is right, if we should create boundaries or not. The idea of what is right, what is ideal, and where there are boundaries, and talking about boundaries is a very modern idea in our new postmodern world. I think it many times it's just a matter of how we feel about the world. If we are okay with judging and tell, okay, this is in the boundaries, this is outside of the boundaries, and we're okay with this or not okay with this. And I feel kind of very playful, play with boundaries. I like boundaries, but I like to pass boundaries and to, I don't know, to skip them and to play with them. And I think this is an exciting moment to play with boundaries other than to set them really strict. So that's my comment.
I do want to just say, this is really more to Matt's comment, that the case of Steve Jobs is instructive because when he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, being an old hippie, he pursued homeopathic remedies for the first year, which had zero effect, and at the end, he actually advised someone else that condition to not delay treatment, and so I wouldn't characterize that as necessarily harmless.
And one other quick note, one could look at the discourse of science as it comes up to the discourse of economics and look at global warming and how there really are terrible effects of one discourse taking dominance over the other. And we see it day to day.
Literally pollution in that instance. This isn't a bad time for us to start to interact with the audience as well, and I know Jackie, you had a hand up.
My comment was about the palm reading, but I remember a time when chiropractic services were not covered at all by the medical community or the health insurance. If you wanted to pursue such treatment, it was out of pocket for sure, and now it's accepted. My position as a chiropractor on staff and her clinic. So that's where semantic boundaries, maybe they just pushed until it was accepted that chiropractic does have benefits. So.
George?
But when you really get down to it, the different semantic environments that exist, eventually, the world keeps changing, eventually, some of them become part of our normal society, so they move into a different place. If you think about the LGBT and the gay movement back 50 years and how that has moved forward. Now, some of the present things that are happening which seem very dangerous, as you mentioned, the environmental issues of global warming, unfortunately are moving in the wrong direction, and that's going to happen. And further, the thing you mentioned about the universities and the tension between administration and teaching. This has cause some serious problems, as I'm sure all of you at universities are aware of. But that's just the way the world works. There are different semantic environments, and they eventually change and coalesce and move away. And the Chinese medicine is, I forget what it's called, with the needles. What's that? Acupuncture. All right, the first time someone had surgery with acupuncture, nobody could believe it. And now acupuncture is just, yeah, we go for acupuncture. Real good.
Hi.
Yeah, Lori.
Oh, okay. So, I suppose is it Carolyn?
I don't know how to pronounce my name in whatever, in
I-
English, so yeah, Caroline.
Carolyn? Okay. So, Carolyn, I was very struck by your saying your wish. Your wish was to have this opening up of this, these boundaries and kind of usurp the power structures that may exist. And I'm certainly sympathetic to that in my own life historically. I need to preface that and say that, anybody that doesn't know me knows that I tend to want to see that, to see people who may need to, may not be privileged in the current parameters of the semantic environment as it currently exists, need a voice, and they need to be able to break what exists, those existing structures. So I was surprised by my reaction, since I would tend to be very sympathetic with the optimism most of you are expressing, except for Ed. Because I guess I've become Ed. In the current environment that we live in, I'm scared to death. Okay? And I, was thinking, when you brought up your example about Trump, you said, you were talking about how you were concerned about crazy talk, and that it can actually be a mode of empowerment. Do you remember when you were talking about?
I didn't talk about Trump, but yeah.
You did
say this. I did say that. Yeah.
You didn't, but I thought of it.
Okay.
And I said to myself, okay, it's one thing when we're looking at people who are underprivileged or marginalized and sort of giving them the power to express their voices in what might be perceived as crazy talk. But what happens when you have somebody who is incredibly powerful and privileged using crazy talk, probably as a very, I wouldn't have given him credit for this in the past, but it could be quite strategic, that he's using the craziness, the crazy talk, to do real damage in the world, as, whether it's with, policies and global warming. So I feel like it's not only people that we have to be mindful of that need to break the power structures or break the powers that be. There are people in positions of great power who can use crazy talk. Nazi Germany, there are people that can use craziness to do such serious damage that, as sympathetic as I am to what you're saying, and I will always, of course, believe we need some openness in the structure, right? It can't be rigid. I'm not comfortable in our current semantic environment with the degree of insanity that we have descended to.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing this point. And I think, and I wanted to, by the way, after also hearing Lance, I wanted to say maybe we need to think and to divide it between people that are less power and people that are more powerful, people that are less privileged, and people more privileged, that can even have a legitimacy to have that crazy talk and be have media coverage of their crazy talk, right? Thank you for this. Yes, I think that we can realize that there is a difference, and we can think of legitimizing maybe or wishing for one and maybe not the other. But I wanted to ask you, why do you think and why do you feel you need to be secured?
Pardon me?
Why do you feel you need to be secured? Why secured?
Secure.
Why we're talking about feeling uncomfortable, we're talking about that you're scared to death.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But not
and-
really so much for myself, because I am privileged and I'm in a I'm very comfortable, frankly. I'm not that worried about me. I'm worried about the children at the border being taken from their parents and separated from them, and the insanity of the talk that perpetuates that this is necessary or a good idea. So when it's used by people
Yeah.
who are quite vulnerable, against people who are quite vulnerable, this is when I get scared. I'm not scared for myself. I'll be fine. And maybe I can go. I don't know. But in general, I'm not worried about my vulnerability compared to most people in conflict.
Yeah, I agree that there is a difference, and I agree also that each one of us judge differently what is a crazy talk. I'm sure many people will count stupidity in a different way than others. And I'm very concerned too. And I'm more concerned when I hear a friend of mine, for instance, telling me that she is supporting the idea of the wall, and because she doesn't understand why there are people that do not follow the rules, that do not follow directions. And for me to follow directions, which is a very interesting and very valuable value in the U.S., is to keep order and to keep that idea of structure and, yeah.
But Carolyn, I would say that she's being manipulated to believe that that's what is happening by Trump's crazy talk. Because it's not about following rules. That's not what what's going on at the border at all. You know, there are rules for seeking asylum from various countries, and it's the opposite of what's going on. But she's being led by a very dangerous thread, and believing that conversation is so.
Yes, but here we're not, but we're getting into a specific argument other than generalizing who has the right or who has the legitimacy to have crazy talk, and that it's accepted by people. Yeah, but yeah, I hear you and understand.
Carolyn, you mentioned early on about being an immigrant and feeling that you would be labeled as coming out with crazy talk. Now, I think that's not the meaning of the purpose of that whole book, is to label people, but to understand people within different contexts. So that the idea would be, let us try and understand where this immigrant person is missing certain things about this context versus that context. So I don't think that this book was written to point fingers. It was written to open up empathy and understanding of different contexts. And then also what I'm thinking about, why be secure? Because the opposite of secure is total chaos. So what we're talking about is extremes. And we need definitions and some boundaries between different semantic environments, because otherwise we would have complete chaos and no ability to understand anything. So I don't think we need to talk about it now, but I'm really curious as to why someone from Israel would be in the United States looked upon in anything other than one of us in terms of understanding Western civilization. So that threw me.
Yeah. So maybe I'll try to explain it differently.
Or maybe have an
Yeah.
example, and then that would make it clear.
Yeah. I have many students that I teach at CSU at Colorado State University, and also last semester I taught at the University of Colorado in Boulder. Very different populations, very interesting. And there are people that are not count, or we would not count them as the white privileged students in the class. Some of them are coming, they're first generation of pursuing education. Some of them are coming from different countries. And when they will talk to me or talk in class, they will not follow all the semantic rules. They will talk a little bit differently. It was really interesting class I taught in Boulder. It was all about identity, how you can learn about identity from when you talk, and how you create your identity when you talk.
Right.
And there was a student from Texas that was really concerned this whole semester, and it was interesting because there are other people with other issues, was very concerned that her accent and her, I don't know if it's accent, but her, forgot the word.
Dialect?
Dialect, thank you. Her dialect was kind of made fun of by her friends in Boulder.
Oh.
And every time she had to write an essay, she would write about something that would relate to her dialect. And it was really interesting to me because her friends did not accept her by her dialect and assumed all kinds of things about her being a Southern and who she is because of her dialect. She did not speak correctly. She did not, and I'm doing this as it's like a not, of course, there is no correct way to speak. But it seems to me from this text that if you do not speak correctly, you can be counted as having stupid talk. Stupidity is like not to follow what it seems as the right way to talk, follows the rules, follows the right context. And many times, for instance, immigrants, but other people that are just not of the same mainstream of how people talk will fall on these rules because they are just not aware of that. So that's what I said. I learned how to speak here, but I did not know how to speak. And I did not know all kinds of rules that for you seems very natural, but in my country and in my society, they are not natural at all. In my country, if you do not speak directly and say directly in the face of the other what you think about them, it means you are just not a friend and you're not playing a fair game. On the Americans, Israelis will say, oh, now you're participating in a fake talk because you are not saying the truth to your friends or to other people. So there are different rules and different norms in all kinds of situations and all kinds of countries and communities, and keeping them or not keeping them seem to me as like creating kind of a boundary between stupid or not stupid, and I just feel uncomfortable with that label. That's what I wanted to say.
I will say that Wendell Johnson actually makes the point that the overall semantic environment is the culture
Mhm.
that we're in. There are different ways to define this, so that if we follow S.I. Hayakawa, which most of us don't want to follow too far, but I mean, and really at the point where he went off the deep end, in a sense, was where he became the leader of U.S. English, right? The movement to make English the official language of the United States. But I think, you know, someone like, certainly like Postman would say that the semantic environment of the classroom is one that should be open to different ways of talking and different points of view. What it can't be open to is, say, somebody getting up and singing the score from Hamilton in the middle of a class, because that then breaks down the semantic environment. So again, I mean, it is sort of open to interpretation.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah,
If
you
may,
can, or
before
two
we get
things.
to
Yeah.
maybe two. Just real briefly, in this day and age of nationalism, we're all so afraid of the other. We're so afraid of difference. And if we really do have an empathy gene, eventually it should lead us to a place where we recognize that our strength in numbers lies in the way we differentiate ourselves from each other. That it's not a universal sameness, it's a universal understanding of our differences. And that's where we're going to find the silver lining in this cloud. How successful we'll be, I don't know. But that's a
Understanding and acceptance
right. Yep.
and appreciation.
Yes, let's one take it so you can. Mike has a question.
Thank you very much. Oh, my hands.
I'm only letting you do your question.
Yeah, thank you. So I have sort of a counterpoint to maybe something that Matt raised, but I think it kind of touches on the general conversation. And there's this idea that, of course, the media environment has created a more horizontal kind of world, that our culture has become more horizontal than it had been in prior years. And there's this idea that maybe, you know, Carolyn raises the idea that, you know, maybe some of the crazy talk is just actually legitimate talk that comes from places that have been marginalized in the sort of semantic environment that's been privileged. And I think that's probably quite a good point. And the idea is that, you know, we talk a lot about voice, and I think part of what we recognizing is not people's vulnerability, because we tend to talk about that quite a bit. And rightly so, people are being brutalized and victimized by those with privilege. But I actually think that if we flip it on its head, it's because it's for that very reason that we've become horizontal. And we see people of color and women and people from different historical contexts and experiences entering into the semantic environment in a way that they hadn't been represented before, and excelling and showing real dignity and showing real, you know, achievement and power from their own lives and in their own idiom. That there's a backlash, that their strength is what has prompted this reaction. The reactionary business is the stuff that we're seeing that looks like crazy talk now. It's flipped on its head. It's because the idea that the president serves hamburgers and all these things, these are all sort of small symptoms of people's desire to tear down the hierarchy, right? And strip away all of these fancy things just at the moment that people who were not allowed in arrive. Right? It's like I have this ice cream cone and I know that you're going to get some of it, so I lick it all over so that you can't have any, right? And I feel like that's what we're seeing right now, is like, right? Or just drop it on the floor, right? And just be like, now I don't want ice cream anymore because ice cream's gross, right? And it's like, you know, I'm a woman, I'm a person of color, I'm an immigrant, I'm someone I went through all your channels. I went to Harvard. I succeeded in business. I achieved the Nobel Prize in science or literature or art and so forth. You know, Hamilton is this perfect artistic moment where we say, do you recognize that we embody all of those things that you say are important to our democracy and to our culture, right? And just as people are recognizing that, this tremendous backlash of fear has occurred where the office of the president is supposed to be this ritual space for the dignity and achievement and the best that we have to offer the world. And this person that's in there right now who's done just the opposite of it is the guy who's dropping the ice cream cone on the floor because the people who have had privilege don't want to give it up. And I think that that's really the thing that we recognize in this, especially sort of the young junior members of the Congress who were just elected. These young women of color in particular who have arrived and really excited and energized people. This is a wonderful moment in history. It's a moment when we're going to look at these people who've demeaned and diminished the dignity of our democracy, who are finally having to be called to the carpet to account for their shittiness, right? And that's what's happening right before our very eyes, and it's an ugly thing because it's a schism, right? It's a tremendous problem. And as a media ecologist, I want to talk about how maybe our social media environment have been part of this and so forth. But the truth of the matter is, just talking about it purely in this human culture way, it's from the point of strength that people have arrived to redefine the terms of dignity and democracy and all these things. And it's a thing to celebrate, I think, even as it's ugly and brutal in the short term. It won't last. It can't last. And it's never lasted for long, right? I actually, I'm not typically this way. I'm very, I feel like Ed. I'm Ed, right? We're all Ed. We're all Ed. We're all Ed. We're all Ed. But I want to raise that point as sort of a counterpoint, is that, recognizing the lack of dignity that we're seeing is not a thing to celebrate, and it's not a sign that, like, maybe finally we're tearing it all down because it's all bullshit, right? Which is a very tempting thing to feel for everyone, because we feel distance from power. But the truth of the matter is we're closer to power now, which is why we should have faith in the dignity that we all have in the voices that we're bringing to the conversation, and we'll drown them out if we do it together. And I am announcing my candidacy for the presidency of the United States.
That's my office.
Yay.
Respond to Mike, because I agree with you like 100%, which is why I follow you into it. Neil Postman uses the example of a bank as a semantic environment, and like, so you walk into a bank and like you're supposed to sort of like stand silently in line, and then you go to the teller and you whisper, and he compares it to a confessional, and that there's like certain kind of rules to the bank, and that like if you went in and sang Hamilton or whatever, you would be arrested. But now in New York, like one of the interesting things is I keep seeing the ads for this is like Citibank or Capital One Bank is doing this thing where the bank is like a cafe. And so like this idea, like you go in and it's not a bank, it's like you get a coffee, I guess, and then
I like getting a coffee.
like you sort of get a coffee and a pastry, and then like then you do your banking. And so like what's kind of interesting to me is like what kind of Mike is saying. It's like if you grow up, it kind of goes back to what Karen's saying. If you grow up and you're kind of like you're taught to learn the semantic environment of how to act in what we call a bank. Now, like the semantic environment is completely flipped, and a bank is a cafe, so you have to be different. You have to talk, and you have to do different things. You can't go stand silently in line, you'll be kicked out of the cafe. So it seems to me that like Postman is sort of interested in people, he doesn't seem to me to say this like as strongly as I would like, in people who can kind of be flexible or adaptable to different semantic environments. So I think, Mike, like that's exactly right. Like someone like Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez is great at Twitter, as good at Twitter as like Trump ever was or whoever it was. And so it's like someone who you point to is like thriving in this like new semantic environment. So I think it's like the answer isn't like, I don't know, like the answer is to sort of be adaptable to like these environments. And I think that's the answer to what kind of Carolyn is saying, is like you have to be able to kind of move between different semantic environments.
We make the environment, though.
Yeah.
We're remaking it in the moment.
We're always remaking it. And so there's a tension, I think, in Postman between like his desire to see kind of rules and like things be kind of ordered, and to kind of have things be truly ecological, which suggests like they're constantly kind of changing and in flux. So he's like a little bit like kind of wary of that, but that's what you're saying is happening. And so, like you said, there's good things about that kind of ecological change as well.
Tom?
Yeah, trying to make sense out of all of this, and I think that, I certainly fully understand the idea of the differentiation in semantic environments of culture, and the difference in semantic environments of knowledge and ideas in what we do with our different schools of thought and our different conceptual frameworks. I understand the difference in semantic environments of media, and I'll expand that to say that that's connected to differences in semantic environments of culture, and to the idea of the semantic environment of a context like this one. And I'm wondering if I left anything out of that, but I think that the project of general semantics, and part of the project of Crazy Talk, Stupid Talk, is to say, but wait a second, there is also this idea of a singular and common, or hopefully common, semantic environment. That is what we're all shooting for. That is the environment that is not to people and not against people, but it's for people and it's with people, in a place where the world can be flat and we can all be treated equally and treat each other equally, and where there's justice and we're all trying to coexist for each other's benefit. Right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Just
checking.
I'm just going to throw in here, just to expand on what Carolyn was saying, or somewhere in that. If I was saying that, I would say that I would agree with everything that you said. I had way too much to drink, so I can't speak as cogently as I would like to. But I would like to say that that there is a possibility within that sphere of an openness of a sense of multiple discourse that opens up a space of, like, whether you want to call it a feminine space, which I kind of feel icky about talking about that, like in those gender terms, but like an open a space where communication is still, you can still talk for and with the people in a flat way, but having an attention to the language and textures and in a way that it can open up possibilities of thinking that maybe just pushes the boundaries a little, so that, maybe to use even Derridian terms, to question the foundations of the thinking praxis, so that it's questioning as it's saying it, so that we're not just saying stuff, but we're understanding the context from which we're speaking, and maybe that would open up the discourse in such a way that we could see more laterally.
Thank you. I really appreciate those two comments. And Ed was just saying that the difference seems to be something to be feared right now when we look at public discourse, right? And not just feared. I feel like if there's a high amount of criticism, and obviously being critical is good, and we want that, but it's to the extent that it's become dismissive. It's just, the discourse has become so dismissive of any idea where we're not immediately recognizing the semantic environment that it's born out of. And there's and it's difficult to recognize those different semantic environments. And so maybe there's, the kind of this semantic literacy, semantic environment, media literacy, really, that we need to, always go back to one way or another, but, and then establish the common ground for this more unifying, universal semantic environment that we're all ultimately in.
Very nice. And if I just maybe say one more thing, or even using sort of a Sixuvian notion, Ellen Sixu, of working within the law and exceeding the law. So we're working within the law of the discourse, of the semantic environment, but exceeding it, having that sort of transgressive, ability that doesn't go so crazy nuts that, as we all know, is happening, but looking at ways that we can push the boundaries just ever so slightly, so that we can question that we don't have to take everything. It doesn't become a totalitarianistic, unilateral way of communication, but we can see, the beauty of difference and be able to appreciate and celebrate those differences.
All right, so which one of you is going to become Trump's next advisor?
Yeah. Well, I do want to share an anecdote. that I heard from Neil Postman related to me. And this actually goes to as well known for folks familiar with Postman's work, that he kind of made a transition from an earlier period where he was associated with the counterculture, and in particular, one of the leaders of the educational reform movement, and known for the book Teaching as a Subversive Activity. And then it's 3 years after Crazy Talk, Stupid Talk that he publishes Teaching as a Conserving Activity. I remember him telling me at one time that he went to an education conference in New York, maybe it was at NYU, and it must have been circa 1970, and someone got up, it's a conference on education, someone got up and said that there is an aircraft carrier down in Brooklyn Navy Yard that is getting ready to sail out to Vietnam. This is during the Vietnam War, and we should all go down there and protest, and that we cannot talk about education until the Vietnam War is ended. And Postman said that was the point where he realized that being associated with the counterculture was not for him, and that this was wrong. There's the sense that you can't talk about anything else unless you first address this, one particular political issue. And I think, this is the idea of disruption, that the context, in this case, is, a very important one. Let's talk about education. How, in the same way that universities were disrupted, there's an interesting kind of tension. And Hayakawa, another anecdote from Postman was, he said the last sensible thing Hayakawa ever said to him when Postman asked, how could you call the National Guard in on students protesting? And he said, they're not students, they're lawbreakers. Which is a change of the semantic environment. Not that he agreed with it, but that we define things one way or another way. But it is that point of, when we get to the point where the semantic environment breaks down, when it's completely disrupted, then where do we go? There's no more room for discourse, there's no more room for dialogue left, and that's the reason why we need to preserve the boundaries and a sense of order. You had a question, though, in the back.
Yeah, trying to sort of digest what you just said there, and where it sort of goes where I was going to go. One of the things that I think you have to think about, and I think we're sort of talking around the elephant in the room, are the semantics of demagoguery, and the nature of how that 36% of Americans that support Trump will not be moved away from essentially their discourse and their understanding of the discourse, whether it's the border wall, or it's gay rights, or it's any number of different situations. And how that actually interacts with perhaps the more diverse and differentiated semantics that go on among the majority of American people. And it's to me, it's one of the key problems right now in a lot of ways. And I think, some of that comes from the aspect that a lot of people who are a part of that semantics of demagoguery also see themselves as essentially out of the mainstream. And so, when we're talking about, okay, well, it's good to have diversity for accepting, other kinds of people's opinions, which I agree with entirely. The question is, how do we bring these people who believe they're out of the mainstream into a dialogue where they can feel accepted, or they can also feel that they can communicate with the rest of society as a whole. We went through a very interesting period. I grew up in Hawaii, and I'm native Hawaiian. And I always like to tell people that because I like you see the immediate relaxation. Oh, Hawaii. You know, it's like everybody thinks, oh, warm, everybody gets along. It's nice, and for the most part, that's all true. But about 15 years ago, we were the first state to actually pass legislation legalizing gay marriage. And what happened as a result of that was the Christian right organized a successful referendum to repeal. It was a shock. It was a shock to the entire Hawaiian body politic. We never thought of ourselves in that way. We were the first state to legalize abortion on demand. We always had a liberal, accepting population of, a highly divergent group of people, no majority race, no majority culture, and it sort of brought home that if we were going to be able to preserve that, we really needed to somehow reach out to these groups that had opposed us and begin to understand why that opposition was there, how it became effective, and how to sort of deal with that in terms of improving the overall discourse within our culture. And 5 years later, we were able to bring the legislation back in. It was accepted. There was no further referendum, and we continued on our way of being the sort of happy land of the aloha spirit. So it's, to me, it's an interesting time that we live in the old Confucian way of an insult. But it's also a period of time where I think we can sort of actually come to grips with the fact that there are these differences out there in how we actually understand the world and how we communicate with each other about how we understand the world. See that as a challenge and try to overcome it.
Robin, you had a comment too? Just since we're at time.
Yeah, I just, very quickly, as a student of Neil Postman, being in this class called Language and Human Behavior, where he required this book that you're all talking about called Crazy Talk, Stupid Talk. I'm from the world of the theater, but language and human behavior, I thought it was going to be an acting class. Anyway, I understand, isn't a definition, we haven't actually gone there, of the semantic environment. Where you are is who you are. They say that in the theater. Where you are is who you are. Right now, we're all talking about this here. Everybody seems really educated and smart, and all these comments have been wonderful. I've changed my mind about Twitter. I think nobody should ever be on Twitter. It's the most stupid thing. And then my friend Brian here says if you want to promote your book, you should get on Twitter. I changed my mind, 180 degrees. So if a definition, maybe I'm wrong, is this a definition? If who you are is where you are, physically where you are, then it occurs to me that when you have your face in a machine, I had my face in a machine, I was writing down things that Ed and Matt and everybody was saying. When you have a face in your machine, your mind is somewhere else. So if you're on Twitter, if you're on social media, you're somewhere else. So you would say, oh, you're in that place. In acting, we call it the third circle, where you're not physically where you are. Just isn't it important to say that physically where you are and the language you use in a company like this one, in a classroom, if you're the president, that defines who you are. And maybe one of the problems is people don't understand or they disagree with what that is. What does it mean to be a president? Where is he? He's not in the White House, this guy. He is somewhere else. He's a real estate mogul who got his money from his father. So that, he's not in the place that he is. I think it's important to define what is the semantic environment.
Okay. Well, since our time is running out, I'm going to ask our panelists for last words, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for hearing me. Thank you for willing to rethink of this important text, and I do appreciate it, and I enjoyed being part of this. Thank you.
Like Carolyn, I'm very appreciative of Lance and the panel and all of you for being here and sharing all the comments and thoughts. And I do want to end on an optimistic note. I think that at the end of the day, it may be too late for us, but as we look at our children and grandchildren, I think there's still hope for them. We have to be purposeful about keeping them in mind as we deal with the semantic environments of our lives.
Thanks, everyone. It's always good to go to something and sort of come in with a bunch of thoughts and then to leave with sort of different thoughts or new thoughts in addition to those ones you came with. So thank you.
Same from my side, thank you very much. It would be great to keep this conversation going if there's so much more to unpack. So yeah, maybe continue sometime, someplace.
Well, we are certainly at a point where we're really just starting and opening up a conversation, and it is one that is worth continuing. And I do want to note that, you know, there is a kind of concept in general semantics circles of calling out the symbol rulers, you know, and that, you know, that we use it to be critical of those in power, and that, you know, the part of the concept of the semantic environment is to hold the people in power, our leaders, to certain rules and certain limitations and certain standards of discourse. So I'm not sure where that leaves us in the state of the semantic environment. In some ways, things have improved. In other ways, not so much. But certainly, things continue to evolve and merit our continued interest, consideration, and discussion. I want to thank you all for coming. Our next session will be on Wednesday, February 20th, and we'll send out an announcement about that, and we will get, we're lagging a little bit behind on getting previous sessions online for viewing, but we will be getting them in short order. Again, thank you so much to our panelists coming here special from out of town and taking part.